It's Friday, February 16th, 2024. Welcome to New Backcountry Snowpack Summary, brought to you by North Shore Rescue. There's quite a bit of weather since we last talked. We had a big storm coming through last weekend, and the freezing levels were hovering. So depending which elevation you're at, you're going to find very, very different conditions. And also throughout the week it got cold and there was quite a bit of wind. So even though we're at low hazard rating right now, there's a lot of spatial variability. And so if we want to know more about this, we're actually going to dive into more snow nerding this week. So stick around for the snowpack discussion. So this week we picked west aspect. We're at 1400 meters. This is actually a micro feature that's sort of facing north on a west aspect. But what we find here is that the snow surface from last week is really easy to find. We have this bomber crust and it's pretty thick. It's probably around 30-35 centimeters thick. So anything below that is not a problem for now. But now, if you've been following the weather this week, there's a lot that happened. So, first off, let's talk about the storm that happened on Sunday. So with that storm, we got a lot more precip than expected. So as far as millimeter precipitation, we recorded about 80 plus millimeters of precipitation. And at higher elevation, about 30 to 45 centimeters of snow. So if you're at like 900 meters on Sunday, you got rain pretty much all the way through. And then if you come up to 1400 meters, you probably got around 40 centimeters. So that's a huge variation. Now, the big thing is what this was falling on. So at lower elevation, if you remember last week, I was talking about this layer of facet that was sitting on the crust. At lower elevation, this will have gotten rained on and will have disappeared. But here at 1400, it's still very obvious that it's there. So here in our profile site, we have 30 centimeters of snow sitting on a very weak faceted layer on a very hard crust, which is fairly atypical for the coast. So that was for the storm itself. Now, after the storm, it got colder and it got super windy. We got strong outflow winds, and even at higher elevation, we're getting 50 to 60 kilometers per hour wind. So that new snow got redistributed. But again, when we're talking about redistribution of snow by wind, there's a lot of things to consider. This week we have wind slabs in the issue. So some of the things to think about when we're talking about wind slabs is, first off, how strong the wind is. So the stronger the winds, the more lower down the slope the snow is going to be. Another thing to consider, of course, is the orientation of the wind and which slopes are going to be loaded. And then when you select your profile site, you also have to keep in mind what the fetch is. So if you're going upwind from where you are, is there a lot of snow that can be picked up and transported? So in this case here, I know that the north side of the mountain has essentially no snow on it and is pretty steep. So I wouldn't expect to see a whole lot of wind transport or wind slab in this particular profile. And then another thing to keep in mind is the relative humidity. And we're maybe getting into the weeds a little bit here, but this week the air was cold, but it was also extremely dry, which means that when the wind tears the snow off the ground and into the atmosphere, a large portion is actually sublimated, which means that it goes directly from snow to vapor and is just reabsorbed into the atmosphere and doesn't necessarily get redeposited. So while we have green brick as the avalanche bulletin right now, it certainly is not a green brick that you should just go, low hazard means no hazard. There are certainly places where you could find things that will surprise you. And the name of the game this weekend is variability. There's quite a bit of variability in the snowpack. If you're on a solar aspect, you'll find that the surface is a pretty strong sun crust. There's the north aspects will be stripped from the snow by the strong winds. Lower elevation, you're going to get much less snow and probably not the presence of these facets. So you really have to keep an eye on where you are and what that means, because that weather really caused the snowpack to be extremely variable. So if we're headed into the weekend, I think like the biggest concern this weekend is that it's warming up. So today, this morning, it's actually a beautiful day. It's quite cool still, but the freezing levels are supposed to rise this afternoon to maybe 1600, and it's actually going to remain fairly warm throughout the weekend, with maybe a little bit of a sprinkle on Sunday, but not much. So if you have a profile like this where you have pretty good snow, a crust in there, but that crust is actually quite brittle. It doesn't really offer a whole lot of support. And you have this starting to warm up and start to melt down. This crust is going to fall apart pretty quickly. And now you have warming snow, 30 centimeters of it sitting on weak facets on top of a crust. Now, granted, I really selected this site because this is what I wanted to show. This is roughly the worst case scenario on the North Shore right now, but it is there and it exists. So while it is low hazard, you definitely want to keep your wits about you and make sure that you're not going to get into those areas where you have 30 centimeters of snow that's warming up, sitting on really weak facets. Okay, that's all the snow nerding I have for you this week. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you next week.